The ballroom doors opened with a whisper, and Grace Carter stepped inside. Her breath caught in her throat. The chandeliers above scattered light like broken diamonds across marble floors, so polished they reflected the faces of people who would never look at her twice. The air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and something else, something cold and sharp that made her stomach twist. She clutched her small purse tighter, feeling the worn fabric of her dress shift against her skin. It was the only dress she owned that could remotely pass for formal. Navy blue cotton with delicate white embroidery along the neckline and sleeves. Her mother had sewn it by hand 23 years ago, her fingers working late into the night by candlelight. Grace had been too young to remember watching her mother make it, but she'd heard the story so many times it felt like a memory. Every stitch carried love. Every thread held a prayer. Now standing in the grand entrance of the Sterling Estates annual charity gala, Grace felt that love wrap around her like armor. She would need it. "Oh my God," a voice sliced through the string quartet's melody. "Is that cotton?" Grace's eyes found the source. A woman in a shimmering gold gown stood near the champagne fountain, her lips twisted in disbelief. Her name was Victoria Ashford, wife of a real estate mogul, and Grace knew her well. She'd watched Victoria's children every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 2 years. Victoria's hand flew to her chest in mock horror. "Grace, what on earth are you doing here?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Conversations around them began to die. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. Grace's throat went dry. "Mrs. Pemberton invited me," she said quietly. "She said all staff members were welcome to attend this year." "Staff members?" Victoria repeated, her voice dripping with amusement. She turned to the woman beside her, a rail-thin blonde in crimson silk. "Did you hear that, Diane? The help is here." Diane's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Well, I suppose even charity cases deserve charity, don't they?" Heat flooded Grace's cheeks. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced them still. She'd survived worse than this. She'd survived her mother's death when she was 19. She'd survived working 3 jobs to pay for community college. She'd survived being invisible in rooms full of people who looked right through her. She could survive this. But then Victoria's eyes traveled down Grace's dress, and her expression shifted from amusement to something darker. "That dress," she said slowly. "Where did you get it?" "My mother made it," Grace said, lifting her chin slightly. "Your mother made it." Victoria's smile widened. "How quaint." Another woman joined them, this one older with silver hair piled high and diamonds dripping from her neck. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem, Margaret," Victoria said sweetly. "We were just admiring Grace's handmade ensemble." Margaret's gaze swept over Grace with the efficiency of a surgeon identifying a tumor. "Handmade," she echoed. "How resourceful." The word resourceful sounded like an insult. Grace felt something crack inside her chest, small and sharp. She wanted to leave. She wanted to turn around and walk back through those massive doors and never return. But her feet wouldn't move, because somewhere in this room was Eleanor Pemberton, the kind elderly woman who'd insisted Grace attend tonight. Eleanor, who'd told her that everyone deserved to feel beautiful once in a while. Eleanor, who'd looked at Grace like she mattered. "I think it's lovely," a younger voice said. Grace turned to see a girl, maybe 21 or 22, with kind eyes and a simple black dress. She smiled at Grace. "The embroidery is incredible. Your mother was talented." "Was," Victoria pounced on the word. "Oh, how sad. So you're an orphan then?" The crack in Grace's chest widened. "I'm sorry for your loss," the young woman said, ignoring Victoria entirely. "I'm Sophie." "Grace," she managed. "Well, Grace, I think you look—" "Excuse me." A man's voice, deep and commanding, cut through the cluster of women like a blade through silk. Everyone turned. Marcus Sterling stood 3 feet away, his presence filling the space with an almost physical weight. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. His tuxedo was immaculate, tailored to perfection, but it was the way he carried himself that made people step back instinctively. Power radiated from him like heat from a fire. Grace had seen him before, of course, from a distance. He was the host of this event, the owner of Sterling Industries, one of the wealthiest men in the country. But she'd never been this close, never felt the full force of his attention, and right now he was looking directly at her. "Mr. Sterling," Victoria said quickly, her voice suddenly honey-sweet. "I heard what you were doing," Marcus said quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria's smile faltered. "I'm sure you misunderstood." "I don't misunderstand much, Mrs. Ashford." His eyes never left Grace. "May I have a word with you, miss?" Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. "Me? Yes." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Marcus gestured toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the growing crowd of onlookers. Grace followed, acutely aware of every eye tracking their movement. Her dress suddenly felt heavier, the embroidery more obvious, the hem too short. When they were far enough from the others, Marcus stopped and turned to face her fully. "I apologize for their behavior," he said. Grace blinked. "You don't need to." "Yes, I do." His voice was firm but not unkind. "This is my home, you're my guest, and what just happened was unacceptable." She didn't know what to say. Men like Marcus Sterling didn't apologize to women like her. They didn't notice women like her. "Your dress," he said, and Grace braced herself for another insult. "It's beautiful." Her breath caught. "The embroidery," he continued, his eyes tracing the delicate white stitching along her collar. "It's familiar." Something flickered across his face, too quick to name. Pain, maybe, or recognition. "My mother made it," Grace said again, softer this time. "Your mother had excellent taste." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rougher. "What's your name?" "Grace. Grace Carter." The name seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His expression shifted, walls slamming down, then cracking, then reforming. "Carter," he repeated. "Yes, sir." "And your mother's name?" Grace hesitated. Something about the way he asked made her pulse quicken. "Lorraine. Lorraine Carter." Marcus Sterling went very, very still. The string quartet finished their piece. Applause rippled through the ballroom. Someone laughed too loudly near the bar. But in their small corner, time seemed to suspend itself. "Lorraine," Marcus whispered, and the way he said it, like a prayer, like a wound, made Grace's skin prickle. "Did you know her?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted past her, toward the dance floor, but Grace had the distinct impression he wasn't seeing the ballroom at all. He was seeing something else, someone else. "I knew someone named Lorraine once," he finally said. "A long time ago. What happened to her?" His jaw tightened. "I lost her." The words carried weight that Grace couldn't fully understand, but she felt it anyway. Loss, regret, a grief so deep it had carved permanent lines into his face. "I'm sorry," she said. Marcus's eyes snapped back to hers, sharp and searching. "How old are you, Grace?" 23. Something cracked in his expression. 23, he echoed. The music started again, a waltz this time, slow and sweeping. Couples began moving toward the dance floor, their gowns swirling like colored smoke. Marcus Sterling straightened his shoulders, and when he looked at Grace again, there was a decision in his eyes, a choice made. "Would you dance with me?" he asked. Grace's heart stopped. "What? Would you dance with me?" he repeated, extending his hand. I don't think." She glanced toward the crowd, toward Victoria and Margaret and all the others who were watching with expressions ranging from shock to outrage. "I don't belong out there. You belong wherever you choose to be," Marcus said firmly, "and right now I'm asking you to choose the dance floor." His hand remained extended between them, steady and sure. Grace thought about her mother, about the hours spent sewing this dress, about the love stitched into every seam, about the woman who told her again and again that she was worthy, that she mattered, that she was enough. She placed her hand in his. Marcus's fingers closed around hers, warm and solid, and he led her toward the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted like water, whispers rising in their wake. Grace heard fragments. "Who is she? The nanny? He can't be serious." But Marcus's grip on her hand never wavered. They reached the middle of the dance floor, and Marcus turned to face her. He placed one hand on her waist, the other still holding hers, and Grace's mind went blank. She'd never waltzed before. She'd never danced with anyone like this. "Follow my lead," Marcus said quietly. "Trust me." The music swelled and he moved, and somehow Grace's body knew what to do. They glided across the polished marble, her cheap cotton dress swirling around her legs, his expensive tuxedo a stark contrast against her navy blue. But in that moment, none of it mattered, because Marcus Sterling was looking at her like she was the only person in the room. "Your mother," he said as they turned. "Did she ever mention anyone named Marcus?" Grace's step faltered slightly, but he steadied her. "No," she said. "She didn't talk much about before." "Before what?" "Before me." His expression darkened. "She raised you alone?" "Yes." "Your father?" "I never knew him." Grace had asked about her father exactly once when she was 7 years old. Her mother's face had crumpled, and she'd whispered, "He doesn't know about you, baby, and it has to stay that way." Grace never asked again. Marcus's hand tightened on her waist, almost imperceptibly. "What did your mother tell you about him?" "Nothing." Grace met his eyes. "Why are you asking me this?" The waltz carried them past Victoria Ashford, whose face had gone pale with fury, past Margaret, whose diamonds glittered with reflected rage, past Sophie, who smiled encouragingly. "Because," Marcus said slowly, carefully, "I think your mother and I knew each other very well." Grace's heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" "The dress you're wearing," he said. "The embroidery, the pattern. I've seen it before." "Where?" "On a dress that belonged to someone I loved more than my own life." His voice cracked on the last word. "Someone I lost 23 years ago." 23 years. The same age as Grace. The ballroom spun around them, but Grace barely noticed. Her mind raced, connecting dots she'd never known existed. Her mother's silence about the past. The way she'd sometimes look at Grace with such profound sadness. The photograph Grace had found once, hidden in a jewelry box. A young Lorraine standing in front of a mansion that looked remarkably like this one. "Mr. Sterling," Grace whispered, "what was your wife's name?" His eyes glistened. "I was never married." "Then who?" "Her name was Lorraine," he said. "Lorraine Carter. And she left me 23 years ago without saying goodbye." The music stopped. The ballroom erupted in polite applause, but Grace couldn't hear it over the roaring in her ears. Marcus Sterling released her waist, but kept hold of her hand. "I need to ask you something," he said urgently, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." Grace nodded, unable to speak. "When is your birthday?" "March 15th. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they were wet. "March 15th, he repeated. 23 years ago." "Yes, Grace." He said her name like it hurt. "Did your mother ever tell you why she named you Grace?" "She said," Grace's voice shook, "she said it was because I was her saving grace, her reason to keep going." A single tear tracked down Marcus Sterling's face, cutting through decades of carefully maintained composure. "I called her that," he whispered. "My Grace, my saving grace." The world tilted. "No," Grace breathed. "That's not possible." But even as she said it, she knew. She knew in the way her mother had sometimes touched her face with such longing, knew in the way she'd sewn this dress with a pattern she'd never explained, knew in the way she'd made Grace promise, on her deathbed, to never hate the father who didn't know she existed. "I think," Marcus said, his voice breaking, "you might be my daughter." And Grace Carter, the invisible nanny in the handmade dress, felt her entire world shatter and rebuild itself in the span of a single heartbeat. The silence that followed Marcus Sterling's words was absolute. Grace stared at him, at this stranger who claimed to be her father, and felt nothing, then everything, then nothing again. Her mind couldn't process it, wouldn't process it. "That's impossible," she said again, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus's hand still held hers, and she realized distantly that his fingers were trembling. "I know how this sounds," he said. "I know what I'm asking you to believe. But Grace, please, don't call me that." She pulled her hand away, suddenly desperate for space, for air, for anything that made sense. "You don't know me. You don't get to call me that." Pain flashed across his face, but he nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry." The crowd around them had begun to notice that something was wrong. Whispers multiplied. Phones appeared. Grace saw Victoria Ashford speaking rapidly to a small group of women, all of them staring. "I need to leave," Grace said. "Please don't." Marcus stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust me. But if there's even a chance that we're... He stopped, collecting himself. "I've been searching for Lorraine for 23 years. I hired investigators. I spent millions. And I never found her. She didn't want to be found," Grace said quietly. "Why?" The question came out raw. "Why would she leave? We were going to..." He stopped again, and Grace saw him physically force down whatever emotion was trying to surface. "We had plans." Grace thought about her mother's small apartment, the way she'd worked herself to exhaustion cleaning houses and taking in sewing, the way she'd cried sometimes when she thought Grace was asleep, the way she'd never ever spoken about Grace's father, except to say that he was a good man who didn't know. "She was protecting you," Grace said, the realization hitting her even as she spoke. "Wasn't she?" Marcus's expression confirmed it before he said a word. "From what?" "I don't know." But Grace was beginning to understand. Her mother had been young, probably working here at the estate, And Marcus Sterling, even 23 years ago, would have been wealthy, powerful, important. You were engaged to someone else. It wasn't a question. Marcus's face went grey. How did you— My mother wasn't stupid, Grace said, anger beginning to burn through the shock. She knew what would happen if people found out. She knew what they'd call her, what they'd call me. I would have protected you both. Would you? Grace's voice rose slightly. Would you have given up everything for a housekeeper and her baby? Would you have walked away from your family's expectations, your business, your entire life? Yes. The word came out like a gunshot, without hesitation, without regret. I loved her, Grace. I loved her more than anything in this world. Then why didn't you find her? The question tore out of Grace's throat. You said you searched. You said you spent millions. But she was right here, in this city, working as a nanny and a seamstress. How hard did you really look? The accusation hung between them, sharp and unforgiving. Marcus's jaw worked. She changed her name, he said finally. She disappeared completely. Every trail went cold. Every lead ended nowhere. And eventually my investigators told me she must have— He stopped, unable to finish. Must have what? Died, he whispered. They told me she must have died. Grace felt something inside her chest crack open. Her mother had been so careful, so deliberate. She'd erased herself completely to protect Grace from this world, from these people, from the complications of being Marcus Sterling's illegitimate daughter. And now, Grace was standing in the middle of that world anyway, wearing her mother's dress, holding her mother's secrets. I need proof, she said. Marcus nodded immediately. Of course. We can do a DNA test. Tonight if you want. I'll have my personal physician— No, Grace shook her head. I mean, I need proof that you're not just saying this because you feel guilty, or because you want to make up for what happened to my mother. I need to know that you actually believe I'm your daughter. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved across the screen, and then he turned it toward her. This is the only photograph I have of her, he said quietly. Grace looked at the screen and felt the ground drop out from under her. It was her mother, young, maybe 19 or 20, standing in a garden with sunlight in her hair. She was laughing at something off camera, her head thrown back, her whole face alight with joy, and she was wearing a dress with delicate white embroidery along the neckline and sleeves, the same dress Grace wore now. She made two, Grace whispered. She made two dresses. Marcus's voice was thick. She's wearing the one I bought her fabric for. We spent an entire afternoon picking out the thread. She said she wanted something that would last forever. He paused. I didn't know she made another one. Grace couldn't look away from the photograph. Her mother looked so young, so happy, so completely unlike the tired, sad woman who'd raised her alone. What happened? Grace asked. Why did she leave? Marcus closed his eyes. My father found out about us. He threatened to destroy her family, to make sure she never worked again, to— His voice broke. He gave her money and told her to disappear. And she did. She left a note saying she didn't love me, that it had all been a mistake, and that I should forget her. But you didn't. I couldn't. He opened his eyes and they were full of decades-old pain. I broke off my engagement. I took over the company from my father and spent the next 20 years building it into something he couldn't control. And every single day I looked for her. Grace's hands were shaking. She never stopped loving you, she said softly. She told me once, right before she died, that she'd made a choice to protect someone she loved. She said it was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but she'd do it again. A sound escaped Marcus's throat, something between a laugh and a sob. She also said, Grace continued, that if I ever met a man who looked at me the way you looked at her in that photograph, I should hold on to him and never let go. Marcus's composure finally shattered. He pressed his hand over his mouth, shoulders shaking, and Grace watched this powerful man break apart in the middle of his own ballroom, and she realized, with a clarity that cut through all her confusion and anger and fear, that he was telling the truth. This was her father. Mr. Sterling, she said gently. He looked up, tears streaming down his face. I think, Grace said, her own voice breaking, I think we should get that DNA test. The smile that crossed his face was like sunrise after the longest night. The next 3 hours passed in a blur. Marcus's personal physician arrived within 20 minutes, discreet and professional. He took samples from both Grace and Marcus, promised results within 48 hours, and disappeared as quickly as he'd come. Eleanor Pemberton appeared shortly after, her kind face creased with concern. She pulled Grace aside and asked if she was all right. if she needed anything, if she wanted to leave. Grace assured her she was fine, though she wasn't sure that was true. The other guests maintained a careful distance, but Grace felt their stares like physical touches. Victoria Ashford had left early, her face tight with barely concealed rage. Margaret and her circle of friends whispered behind their champagne flutes. Only Sophie approached, squeezing Grace's hand and telling her she was brave. Grace didn't feel brave. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to either fly or fall. Marcus stayed close, but not too close, respecting her space while making it clear he wasn't going anywhere. He'd composed himself after his breakdown, but Grace could see the emotion still simmering beneath his controlled exterior. Every time he looked at her, his eyes went soft with something that looked like wonder. It was terrifying. Around midnight, Marcus suggested they move to his private study. Grace agreed, grateful to escape the ballroom's oppressive attention. The study was everything Grace expected: dark wood, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a massive desk that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. But it also held unexpected warmth. Photographs lined one wall, showing Marcus at various ages with people Grace didn't recognize. A worn blanket draped over one chair. A coffee mug sat on the desk with the words, "World's Okayest Boss," printed on it. "My assistant gave me that," Marcus said, noticing her gaze. "She has a terrible sense of humor." Grace smiled, despite herself. "It's nice. She's nice." He gestured to one of the leather chairs. "Please, sit." Grace sat, and Marcus took the chair across from her rather than positioning himself behind the desk. Equal footing, she realized. He was trying to make this less intimidating. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know what to say or how to act. I've imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it's here, I'm completely lost." "That makes two of us," Grace said. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them. "Tell me about her," Marcus said finally. "Tell me about Lorraine, about your mother." Grace's throat tightened. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." His voice was hungry. "Anything. I've spent 23 years with nothing but a photograph and memories." "Please." So Grace told him. She told him about her mother's laugh, which was rare but beautiful, about the way she hummed while she sewed, old songs Grace never learned the names of, about her stubbornness, her pride, her fierce determination to give Grace a better life than she'd had, about the way she'd worked herself sick and never complained, about her final days in the hospital, when she'd held Grace's hand and whispered apologies for things Grace didn't understand. Marcus listened with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just absorbed every word, like a man dying of thirst. When Grace finally finished, her voice hoarse, Marcus was crying again, silent tears that he didn't bother to wipe away. "She sounds exactly like I remembered," he said. "Strong, stubborn, beautiful." "She was," Grace agreed. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," Marcus said. "I'm sorry you grew up without a father. I'm sorry she had to do it all alone. I'm sorry for all of it." Grace didn't know what to say to that. Sorry didn't change anything. Sorry didn't erase 23 years of absence. But looking at Marcus's broken expression, she understood that he knew that. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was simply stating a truth that had been destroying him for decades. "She never blamed you," Grace said quietly. "She blamed herself and your father." Marcus's expression hardened. "My father died 5 years ago." "I know. I saw the obituary." Grace had read it in the newspaper, curious about the man who'd built Sterling Industries. She'd never imagined he was her grandfather. "He never knew about you," Marcus said. "I made sure of that. After what he did to Lorraine, I couldn't—" He stopped, jaw clenched. "I cut him out of my life as much as possible. He remained chairman of the board, but I controlled everything else. And when he died, I felt nothing but relief." The bitterness in his voice was shocking. "He was a cruel man," Marcus continued. "He believed people were tools to be used or obstacles to be removed. He saw Lorraine as an obstacle." His hands curled into fists. "If I'd known about you, if I'd known she was pregnant, I would have—" "What?" Grace asked. "What would you have done?" "I would have burned everything down to find her," Marcus said simply. "My company, my reputation, my entire life. I would have destroyed it all." Grace believed him. "But she didn't want that," Grace said. "She didn't want you to sacrifice everything for her. That should have been my choice." "No." Grace shook her head. "It should have been both of your choices, together. But your father took that away from you." Marcus's expression crumpled. "I hate that she went through pregnancy alone. I hate that she raised you without help. I hate that she died without me ever knowing she'd given me a daughter." His voice broke. "I hate all of it." Grace felt tears burning in her own eyes. "Me too." They sat in shared grief, two strangers bound by a woman who'd loved them both enough to destroy her own happiness. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. "Regardless of what the DNA test says, I want you to know something." Grace looked up. "I'm going to be in your life," he said firmly. "If you'll let me. Whether you're my biological daughter or not, you're Lorraine's daughter. And that means your family." Something warm unfurled in Grace's chest. "You don't have to." "I want to," Marcus interrupted. "I need to. For her. For me. For you." He leaned forward. "I know I can't replace the years I missed. I know I can't be the father you needed growing up, but I can be here now if you'll have me." Grace thought about her mother's final words. "Find joy, baby. Find people who see you. Find a place where you belong." Maybe this was it. "Okay," she whispered. Marcus's smile was like dawn breaking. The DNA results arrived 46 hours later. Grace was at work when Marcus called. She'd been changing diapers for the Morrison twins, trying to keep her mind occupied and failing spectacularly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face. Every time she was alone, she felt the weight of possibility crushing her chest. Her phone buzzed. Marcus Sterling's name appeared on the screen. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. "Hello?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Grace." Marcus's voice was thick with emotion. "The results are in." Time stopped. "And?" She couldn't breathe. 99.9% probability. He paused and she heard him take a shaky breath. "You're my daughter, Grace. You're my daughter." The phone slipped from her fingers. It hit the nursery floor with a dull thud, and Grace sank down beside it, her legs refusing to hold her weight anymore. One of the twins started crying, but the sound seemed to come from very far away. She was Marcus Sterling's daughter. She had a father. She'd always had a father. She just hadn't known it. Grace picked up the phone with trembling hands. "Are you sure? I'm looking at the results right now." His voice cracked. "Grace, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm so sorry you had to grow up without knowing. Stop," Grace said softly. "Stop apologizing. It's not your fault. It feels like my fault. I know." Grace closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "But it's not. It's just what happened." They stayed on the phone in silence for a long moment, both of them processing the confirmation of what they'd already known in their hearts. "What happens now?" Grace finally asked. "That's up to you," Marcus said. "We can take this as slowly as you need, or as quickly, whatever you're comfortable with." Grace thought about her tiny apartment, her 3 jobs, her student loan debt, her entire life built on the foundation of being alone, being invisible, being nobody's daughter. "I don't know what I'm comfortable with," she admitted. "That's okay." Marcus's voice was gentle. "We'll figure it out together. Together." The word felt foreign and wonderful at the same time. "Can I see you?" Marcus asked. "Tonight? Tomorrow? Whenever you're ready?" Grace looked around the nursery, at the expensive toys and designer furniture, at the life she'd been observing from the outside for so long. "Tonight?" she said. "I can come tonight. I'll send a car. I can take the bus." "Grace." There was something in the way he said her name now, something possessive and protective. "Please let me send a car." She wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her independence, her pride, her sense of self, but she was so tired of struggling, of fighting, of doing everything alone. "Okay," she whispered. 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock. After they hung up, Grace sat on the nursery floor for a long time, listening to the twins babble to each other, trying to understand how her entire world had changed in less than 48 hours. She was Grace Carter, invisible nanny, and she was also Grace Sterling, Billionaire's daughter. She had no idea which one was real anymore. The car that arrived at 6:45 was not what Grace expected. She'd imagined something sleek and black and intimidating. Instead, a comfortable silver sedan pulled up, driven by a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Grace?" the woman asked as Grace approached. "Yes, I'm Patricia. I've worked for Mr. Sterling for 15 years. She opened the back door. "He wanted me to tell you that you can sit up front if you'd prefer. He didn't want you to feel like hired help." Grace's throat tightened. She slid into the front passenger seat. "Thank you." As they drove through the city, Patricia made gentle conversation. She talked about the weather, about traffic, about a new restaurant that had opened downtown. She didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. She just filled the silence with comfortable noise, and Grace was grateful. "He's nervous, you know," Patricia said as they turned onto the long driveway leading to the Sterling estate. "He is?" "Terrified," Patricia smiled. "I've never seen him like this. He's been pacing his study for the past hour, rearranging furniture, asking me if the lighting is too harsh, if the chairs are comfortable enough." She glanced at Grace. "He wants everything to be perfect for you." Grace didn't know what to say to that. The estate looked different at night. The massive house glowed with warm light from dozens of windows. The gardens were illuminated by subtle landscape lighting that made everything look magical and slightly unreal. Patricia pulled up to the front entrance, and before Grace could open her door, Marcus appeared. He must have been watching for the car. He looked different than he had at the gala, less formal in dark slacks and a simple button-down shirt, but somehow more vulnerable. "Grace," he said as she stepped out, "thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, neither sure how to greet the other. A handshake felt too formal. A hug felt too intimate. Finally, Marcus gestured toward the house. "Shall we?" Grace followed him inside, through the grand foyer she remembered from the gala, down a hallway lined with art that probably cost more than most houses, and into a smaller, cozier room she hadn't seen before. It was a sitting room, she realized. Not a formal parlor or a study, but an actual living space. Comfortable couches, soft lighting, bookshelves filled with worn paperbacks alongside leather-bound classics. A fireplace crackled gently in the corner. "I thought this might be less intimidating than my study," Marcus said. "It's nice. It was my mother's favorite room." He paused. "She died when I was 25. Cancer. I'm sorry. She would have loved you." Marcus's voice was soft. "She would have loved Lorraine too. She never approved of my father's methods. She tried to stop him from—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "She tried." Grace sat on one of the couches, and Marcus took the chair across from her, maintaining that careful distance. "I've been thinking about what to say to you," Marcus began. "I've rehearsed speeches, planned conversations, tried to find the right words." He shook his head. "But there are no right words for this, are there?" "Probably not," Grace agreed. "So I'm just going to be honest." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I want to know you, Grace. I want to know everything about you. Your favorite color, your dreams, your fears, what makes you laugh, what makes you angry. I want to know the person my daughter became without me." The word daughter still felt strange, wonderful and terrifying and strange. "I want to know you too," Grace said quietly. "But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of this not being real, of waking up and finding out it was all a mistake, of you realizing I'm not what you hoped for." She twisted her hands in her lap. "Of losing you the way I lost her." Marcus's expression crumpled. "Grace, you could never be a disappointment to me, never. You exist, you're alive, you're here. That's more than I ever dreamed possible." "But you don't know me," Grace protested. "What if you don't like who I am?" "Then I'll love who you are anyway," Marcus said simply. "That's what parents do." The word parents broke something open inside Grace. She started crying, and once she started, she couldn't stop. 23 years of grief and loneliness and longing poured out of her in great gasping sobs. Marcus moved to sit beside her on the couch, close but not touching, giving her space while making it clear he wasn't going anywhere. "I'm sorry," Grace choked out. "I don't know why I'm—" "You don't have to apologize," Marcus said gently. "Cry as much as you need. I'm not going anywhere." So she did. She cried for her mother, who'd sacrificed everything. She cried for the father she'd never known. She cried for the little girl who'd grown up feeling incomplete, like a puzzle with missing pieces. She cried for all the birthdays and holidays and ordinary moments that should have been shared but weren't. And when she finally exhausted herself, when the tears slowed and her breathing evened out, Marcus handed her a box of tissues and waited patiently while she composed herself. "Better?" he asked. "Embarrassed," Grace admitted. "Don't be." He smiled sadly. "I did the same thing after I got the DNA results. My assistant found me crying in my office. She was very concerned." Grace laughed, a watery, broken sound. "The one with the terrible sense of humor? That's the one. She told me to pull myself together because I was scaring the interns." His smile widened slightly. "Then she hugged me and told me congratulations. She sounds nice." "She is. You'll meet her." Marcus paused. "If you want to, that is. No pressure." Grace wiped her eyes. "I want to meet everyone. I want to see where you work, what you do, who you are." She took a shaky breath. "I want to know my father." The joy that lit up Marcus's face was almost painful to witness. "Then we'll start tomorrow," he said. "I'll show you the company, introduce you to people. We'll have lunch." We'll talk. He hesitated. And Grace? I want you to quit your jobs. Grace stiffened. What? I know how that sounds, Marcus said quickly. I'm not trying to control you. I'm not trying to take away your independence, but you're working 3 jobs, barely sleeping, struggling to make ends meet, and you're my daughter. Please let me help you. I don't want your money, Grace said, even though it wasn't entirely true. She was exhausted. She was drowning in debt. She was one emergency away from complete financial collapse. It's not about the money, Marcus said. It's about time. If you're working 70 hours a week, when will we get to know each other? When will you have space to process all of this? He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Let me give you time, Grace. That's all I'm asking. Grace looked down at their joined hands. His was larger, rougher, marked with old scars she didn't know the stories behind yet, but it felt right. It felt safe. Okay, she whispered. Marcus's grip tightened. Okay, I'll quit 2 of the jobs. But I want to keep working with the Morrison twins. She met his eyes. I need something that's mine. Something that isn't about you or this or any of it. I need to still be me. Of course. Marcus nodded immediately. Whatever you need. Whatever makes you comfortable. They sat like that for a while, hands linked, both of them adjusting to this new reality. Can I ask you something? Grace said eventually. Anything. What was she like? My mother when you knew her. Marcus's expression softened into something beautiful and heartbreaking. She was sunshine, he said simply. She lit up every room she entered. She had this laugh that made everyone around her smile. She was smart. So much smarter than anyone gave her credit for. She read constantly, taught herself things, asked questions that made me think. He paused, lost in memory. She was kind, genuinely, deeply kind. She saw people, really saw them in a way most people don't. She was still like that, Grace said quietly. Even when she was tired, even when things were hard, she never lost that kindness. I'm glad. Marcus's voice was thick. I'm glad she got to be herself even without me. She never stopped loving you, Grace said. She never said it explicitly, but I knew. The way she'd look at certain things, old photographs, the fabric from that dress, letters she kept hidden. She loved you until the day she died. A tear tracked down Marcus's face. I never stopped loving her either. They sat in shared grief and shared love, connected by a woman who'd shaped both their lives in profound ways. I wish she could see this, Grace whispered. I wish she could know that we found each other. I think she does, Marcus said. I think, somehow, wherever she is, she knows. Grace wanted to believe that, needed to believe that. Stay for dinner? Marcus asked. Please? I had the chef prepare your favorite meal. Grace blinked. How do you know my favorite meal? Marcus looked slightly sheepish. I may have asked Eleanor Pemberton. She may have asked the Morrisons. They may have mentioned you love homemade lasagna. Despite everything, Grace laughed. You researched me. I wanted to get something right, Marcus admitted. Is that okay? It's perfect, Grace said. And it was. Dinner was surreal. They ate in a small dining room, not the massive formal one Grace glimpsed down another hallway. Just the 2 of them, homemade lasagna that tasted exactly like her mother used to make, and conversation that flowed more easily than Grace expected. Marcus asked about her childhood, and Grace told him stories, the time she'd tried to dye her hair blue with food coloring and ended up green, the way her mother had laughed so hard she'd cried, the community college classes Grace had taken at night while working full-time, her dream of becoming a teacher someday. You still can, Marcus said. Be a teacher, I mean, if that's what you want. I don't have a degree, so get one. He said it like it was simple. I'll pay for it. You can go full-time, part-time, whatever works for you. Grace's chest tightened. That's too much. Grace. Marcus set down his fork. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Let me spend some of it on my daughter's education, please. The word daughter was getting easier to hear. I'll think about it, Grace said. That's all I ask. After dinner, Marcus showed her the house. Not all of it. That would have taken hours. But the important parts. His study, where he spent most of his time. The library, which had a rolling ladder and smelled like old books and leather. The music room, where a grand piano sat silent and beautiful. Do you play? Grace asked. I used to. My mother taught me. Marcus ran his fingers along the piano's edge. I haven't touched it in years. Why not? It reminded me too much of what I'd lost. He looked at Grace. Do you play? No. My mother tried to teach me to sing once, but I was terrible. Grace smiled at the memory. She said I had enthusiasm, which was a polite way of saying I couldn't carry a tune. Marcus laughed, and the sound filled the room with warmth. They ended up back in the sitting room, neither ready for the evening to end. I want to tell people, Marcus said suddenly. About you. About us. Grace's stomach clenched. Tell people. The board, the company, the press. He saw her expression and quickly added, only if you're comfortable. But Grace, you're my daughter, you're my heir, people need to know. Your heir. Grace's voice came out strangled. Of course. Marcus looked confused. You're my only child. Everything I have will be yours someday. The room spun. I don't want your money. I know you don't. That's one of the reasons you deserve it. Marcus leaned forward. But this isn't just about money, Grace. It's about legitimacy, recognition, making sure the world knows you're my daughter, not some secret I'm ashamed of. I didn't think you were ashamed. I'm not. But others will assume. They'll whisper. They'll speculate. They'll say terrible things. His jaw clenched. I want to control the narrative before they can. I want to introduce you properly, publicly, as my daughter and my heir. Grace's mind raced. When? There's a board meeting next week. I could announce it then. Or we could hold a press conference. Or... He stopped, reading her expression. Or we could wait. As long as you need. Grace thought about Victoria Ashford's cruel smile. About Margaret's dismissive gaze. About all the people who'd looked through her like she was invisible. Next week, she said. Marcus's eyebrows rose. Are you sure? No. Grace laughed shakily. But I don't think I'll ever be sure, so we might as well do it. We don't have to. I want to, Grace interrupted. You're right. People will talk anyway. At least this way we control what they're saying. Marcus studied her for a long moment. You're stronger than you know. I learned from my mother. You learned well. They talked for another hour, making plans, discussing logistics, trying to prepare for something neither of them fully understood. Finally, around midnight, Grace admitted she should probably go home. Stay, Marcus said. Please, we have dozens of guest rooms. Stay tonight. Let me make you breakfast in the morning. You cook? God, no. But I'll have the chef make you breakfast. He smiled. Please, Grace. I'm not ready to say goodbye yet. Grace wasn't either. Okay, she said. I'll stay. The guest room Marcus showed her to was larger than her entire apartment. It had a king-sized bed with soft white linens, a sitting area with a fireplace, and a bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in. Is this okay? Marcus asked anxiously. If you'd prefer a different room. It's perfect, Grace assured him. There are clothes in the closet. Patricia bought some things she thought might fit. If they don't, or if you don't like them, we can... Marcus. Grace touched his arm gently. It's perfect. All of it. Thank you. He nodded, looking relieved. I'm just down the hall if you need anything. Anything at all? Okay. He hesitated at the door, like he wanted to say something else. Finally, he just said, Good night, Grace. Good night, Dad. The word slipped out before Grace could stop it. She froze, horrified, but Marcus's face transformed. Joy and wonder and love flooded his expression. Good night, sweetheart, he whispered, and then he was gone. Grace stood in the middle of her borrowed room in her dead mother's dress and realized she'd just called Marcus Sterling Dad, and it had felt right. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Marcus insisted on taking Grace shopping for appropriate clothes for the board meeting. She protested, but he was relentless, and eventually she gave in. They spent an entire afternoon in boutiques Grace had only ever walked past, trying on outfits that cost more than her monthly rent. You need to look the part, Marcus explained, as a saleswoman brought out yet another designer suit. Not because I care what you wear, but because they will. First impressions matter. I hate this, Grace muttered, but she tried on the suit anyway. Marcus's assistant, Jennifer, turned out to be exactly as advertised. Sharp, funny, and completely unfazed by the revelation that her boss had a secret daughter. She helped Grace prepare for the board meeting, coaching her on names, positions, and potential questions. They're going to be skeptical, Jennifer warned. Some of them will be hostile. Marcus's father had allies on that board, and they're not going to be happy about this. What should I say? The truth, Jennifer smiled. You're Marcus's daughter. You didn't ask for this. You're not trying to take anything from anyone. You're just trying to understand your place in all of it. Grace practiced her introduction a dozen times. It never felt natural. The night before the board meeting, Marcus took her to dinner at a quiet restaurant far from the city center. They talked about everything except the next day, both of them avoiding the elephant in the room. Finally, over dessert, Marcus said, You don't have to do this. I know. We can wait. We can take more time. We can... Marcus, Grace reached across the table and took his hand. I want to do this. I'm terrified, but I want to do it. Why? Because you're my father. Grace said it simply. Because I'm tired of being invisible. Because my mother spent 23 years hiding, and I don't want to hide anymore. Marcus's eyes glistened. She would be so proud of you. I hope so. The next morning, Grace put on her new suit, navy blue, professional, expensive, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked like someone else, someone confident and polished, and completely unlike the nanny in the handmade dress. But when she looked closer, she saw her mother's eyes staring back at her, her mother's stubborn chin, her mother's strength. I can do this, she whispered to her reflection. Marcus was waiting downstairs, also in a suit, looking every inch the powerful CEO. But when he saw Grace, his expression softened. You look perfect, he said. I look terrified. That too. He smiled. Ready? No. Good. Neither am I. They rode to Sterling Industries headquarters in comfortable silence. The building was massive, all glass and steel and modern architecture. Grace had walked past it 100 times, never imagining she'd one day walk through its doors as the owner's daughter. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Marcus led Grace to his office first, a sprawling space on the top floor with views of the entire city. We have a few minutes, he said. Do you need anything? Water, coffee, a paper bag to breathe into? Grace laughed, despite her nerves. I'm fine. Liar. Okay, I'm not fine, but I will be. Marcus pulled her into a hug, the first real one they'd shared. Grace stiffened for a moment, then melted into it. He smelled like expensive cologne and coffee and something else, something that felt like safety. No matter what happens in there, Marcus said quietly, you're my daughter. Nothing they say or do can change that. Promise? Promise. A knock on the door interrupted them. Jennifer poked her head in. They're ready for you. Marcus took a deep breath. Let's do this. The boardroom was exactly as intimidating as Grace feared. A massive table surrounded by leather chairs, all occupied by men and women in expensive suits. They looked up as Marcus and Grace entered, and Grace felt their collective assessment like a physical weight. Marcus moved to the head of the table, and Grace stood beside him, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Thank you all for coming, Marcus began. I know this meeting was called on short notice, but I have an announcement that couldn't wait. The board members exchanged glances. Grace recognized a few faces from the gala, people who'd watched her dance with Marcus, who'd whispered and speculated. 3 weeks ago, Marcus continued, I learned something that changed my life. I learned that 23 years ago, the woman I loved left me without explanation. I learned that she was pregnant when she left, and I learned that she raised our daughter alone, never telling me I had a child. The room erupted. Questions flew from all directions. Is this a joke? Do you have proof? What are the legal implications? Who is the mother? Marcus held up his hand, and the room gradually quieted. I have DNA confirmation, he said calmly. I have documentation. I have everything you need to verify what I'm telling you. He turned to Grace. This is Grace Carter, my daughter, and as of today she is my official heir and will be taking a position within Sterling Industries. More chaos. More questions. Grace stood frozen, overwhelmed by the noise and hostility. Then a voice cut through the din. This is absurd. Grace's eyes found the speaker, an older man, maybe 70, with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. His nameplate read, Richard Ashford, Victoria's father-in-law. Marcus, you can't seriously expect us to accept this, Richard continued. Some girl shows up claiming to be your daughter, and we're supposed to just... She's not claiming anything, Marcus interrupted, his voice dangerous. I'm telling you she's my daughter. There's a difference. But how do we know? I have DNA results from 3 separate labs. Marcus's tone could have cut glass. I have documentation of my relationship with her mother. I have photographs, letters, and 23 years of searching for a woman I loved. What more do you need, Richard? I need to know that you're thinking clearly, Richard shot back. I need to know that you're not being manipulated by some opportunistic... Finish that sentence, Marcus said quietly. And you're off this board. The threat hung in the air. Richard's face flushed red, but he stayed silent. Another board member, a woman Grace didn't recognize, spoke up. Marcus, I think what Richard is trying to say, perhaps inelegantly, is that this is a significant development. We need time to process, to understand the implications for the company. I understand that, Marcus said, his tone softening slightly, which is why I'm telling you now before making any public announcement. You'll have time to adjust. But make no mistake, Grace is my daughter, and she will be part of this company's future. In what capacity? Someone asked. That's still being determined, Marcus admitted. Grace is still in school, still figuring out her career path, but she will have a seat on this board, and she will inherit my shares when I die. More murmurs, more exchanged glances. Grace finally found her voice. May I say something? Every eye turned to her. I know this is unexpected, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I know you have no reason to trust me. I know I'm a stranger walking into something I don't fully understand. She took a breath. But I'm not here to take anything from anyone. I didn't ask for this. I didn't even know Marcus existed until 3 weeks ago. I'm just trying to understand who I am and where I come from. And who was your mother? Richard asked, his tone sharp. Her name was Lorraine Carter, Grace said, lifting her chin. She worked here 23 years ago. She left because she was protecting me from people who would have destroyed her for loving someone above her station. She looked directly at Richard. People like Marcus's father. People who saw her as an obstacle instead of a person. Richard's expression darkened, but he said nothing. My mother raised me alone, Grace continued. She worked herself to exhaustion to give me a good life. She never asked Marcus for anything. She never tried to use me to get money or power or anything else. She just loved me and did her best. Her voice cracked, and she died 2 years ago without ever telling me who my father was. The room had gone very quiet. So no, Grace said firmly. I'm not here to manipulate anyone. I'm here because I finally found my father, and he found me, and we're trying to figure out what that means. She looked around the table. If that makes you uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but I'm not going anywhere. Silence. Then, slowly, the woman who'd spoken earlier smiled. Well said. A few others nodded. Not everyone. Richard and his allies still looked hostile. But enough. Marcus's hand found Grace's under the table and squeezed. The meeting continued for another hour, covering logistics and legalities and a dozen other details Grace barely processed. But she'd said her piece. She'd stood up for herself and her mother. She'd been seen. When the meeting finally ended, board members filed out, some offering congratulations, others maintaining cold silence. Richard Ashford left without a word, his expression promising future problems. Finally, only Marcus, Grace, and Jennifer remained. You did great, Jennifer said, giving Grace a quick hug. Seriously, you handled Richard perfectly. I thought I was going to throw up, Grace admitted. We all thought you were going to throw up, Jennifer said cheerfully. But you didn't, and that's what matters. Marcus was watching Grace with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe. Or wonder. What? Grace asked. You sounded exactly like your mother just then, he said softly. When you stood up to Richard, that's exactly what Lorraine would have said. Grace's eyes burned. Really? Really? Marcus pulled her into another hug. She would be so incredibly proud of you. Grace let herself believe it. The press conference was scheduled for the following week. Marcus wanted to control the narrative before rumors spread, and Grace agreed. They spent days preparing, working with a PR team to craft the perfect statement. Grace practiced answering questions until she could do it in her sleep. The night before the press conference, Grace couldn't sleep. She lay in her guest room at the Sterling estate, which had become her semi-permanent residence, and stared at the ceiling, trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. A soft knock on her door made her sit up. Come in. Marcus entered, also clearly unable to sleep. I saw your light on. Couldn't sleep. Me neither. He sat on the edge of her bed, and the gesture was so parental, so normal, that Grace felt tears prick her eyes. What if they hate me? She asked quietly. Some of them will, Marcus said honestly. Some people will say terrible things. They'll question your motives, your character, your right to be here. He took her hand. But Grace, their opinions don't define you. You know who you are. I know who you are. That's what matters. I'm scared. I know I'm scared too. Grace looked at him in surprise. You are? Terrified. Marcus smiled sadly. I'm scared of saying the wrong thing. I'm scared of not protecting you enough. I'm scared of the world hurting you the way it hurt your mother. His grip tightened. But I'm more scared of letting fear stop us from living our lives. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, and Marcus wrapped his arm around her. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For finding me. For wanting me. For being my dad. Marcus's voice was thick. Thank you for letting me. They sat like that for a long time, father and daughter, preparing to face the world together. The press conference was held in Sterling Industries' main auditorium. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled every seat. The energy in the room was electric with anticipation. Grace stood backstage with Marcus, both of them in formal business attire, both of them terrified. "Ready?" Marcus asked. "No." "Good answer." He smiled. "Let's go anyway." They walked out together, and the camera flashes were blinding. Grace forced herself to keep walking, to keep her head up, to project confidence she didn't feel. Marcus stepped up to the podium, and the room gradually quieted. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I have an announcement that is both personal and professional in nature, and I wanted to share it directly rather than through official channels." He paused, and Grace saw him gather himself. 23 years ago, I was in love with a woman named Lorraine Carter. We planned to build a life together, but circumstances beyond our control separated us, and I spent the next 2 decades searching for her without success. His voice roughened. 2 years ago, Lorraine passed away, and 3 weeks ago, I learned that when she left, she was pregnant with my child. The room erupted with noise. Cameras flashed faster. Reporters shouted questions. Marcus held up his hand. "Please, let me finish." The noise subsided slightly. "I'd like to introduce you to my daughter, Grace Carter." He gestured to Grace, who stepped forward on shaking legs. Grace is 23 years old. She was raised by her mother, who never told her about me. We recently connected, and DNA testing has confirmed our relationship. He looked at Grace with unmistakable love. "She is my daughter, my heir, and as of today, a member of the Sterling Industries family." More chaos, more questions. Grace heard fragments. Where has she been? Why come forward now? What about the company? Marcus fielded questions with practiced ease, explaining the circumstances without revealing too many personal details. He protected Lorraine's memory, protected Grace's privacy, and made it clear that anyone who questioned his daughter's legitimacy would answer to him. Finally, a reporter asked, "Ms. Carter, how does it feel to suddenly be one of the wealthiest women in the country?" Grace stepped up to the microphone, her heart pounding. "Surreal," she said honestly. 3 weeks ago, I was working 3 jobs and struggling to pay rent. Now I'm standing here as Marcus Sterling's daughter. It doesn't feel real yet. What do you plan to do with your new position?" Grace thought about her mother, about the years of struggle, about all the people still struggling. "I want to help people," she said. "My mother taught me that wealth means nothing if you don't use it to make the world better. So that's what I plan to do. The details are still being worked out, but I want to focus on education, on helping people who are where I was, working multiple jobs, drowning in debt, trying to build a better life." "That's very noble," the reporter said, and Grace couldn't tell if it was sincere or sarcastic. "It's what my mother would have wanted," Grace said simply. More questions followed, but eventually Marcus called an end to the conference. As they left the stage, Grace felt the weight of 1,000 eyes following her. "You did great," Marcus murmured. "I feel like I'm going to be sick." "That's normal." They made it back to Marcus's office before Grace's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, adrenaline draining away, leaving her exhausted. "It's done," Marcus said, pouring her a glass of water. "The hard part is over." "Is it?" "Well, no. Now comes the part where everyone has opinions about your life." He smiled wryly. "But at least the announcement is done." Grace's phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. She pulled it out and stared at the screen. Dozens of notifications, text messages, social media mentions, news alerts. Her face was everywhere. "Oh God," she whispered. Marcus gently took the phone from her hands. "Don't look at it, not today. Let Jennifer monitor everything. You just focus on breathing." "I can't believe this is my life now." "I know." Marcus sat beside her. "But Grace, you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, whatever people say, I'm right here." Grace leaned against him, and Marcus wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "We're going to be okay," he said quietly. And despite everything, Grace believed him. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Grace's face was on every news site, every gossip blog, every social media platform. The reactions were mixed. Some people were supportive, touched by the story of a father and daughter reunited. Others were cruel, questioning Grace's motives, calling her a gold digger, speculating about her mother's character. Marcus had been right. It was brutal, but he'd also been right about something else. Grace wasn't alone. Marcus hired a security team after someone showed up at Grace's old apartment. He helped her move her belongings to the estate, giving her a permanent room and making it clear she was welcome to stay as long as she wanted. He introduced her to his friends, his colleagues, his world, always making sure she felt supported. And slowly, Grace began to find her footing. She started taking classes at the university, working toward the teaching degree she'd always dreamed of. Marcus insisted on paying and Grace finally accepted, understanding that letting him help wasn't weakness, it was allowing him to be her father. She also started working with Sterling Industries' charitable foundation, developing programs to help low-income students access education. It was meaningful work that honored her mother's memory, and Grace threw herself into it with passion. But the best moments were the quiet ones. Dinners with Marcus where they talked about everything and nothing, movie nights where they argued about which film to watch, Sunday mornings where Marcus attempted to make pancakes and Grace laughed at his terrible cooking skills. They were building a relationship, building a family. 3 months after the press conference, Marcus asked Grace to accompany him to a charity gala, not as his employee or his ward, but as his daughter. "It's the same event where we met," he explained. "I thought it might be nice to attend together this time, officially." Grace agreed, though the thought of returning to that ballroom made her nervous. The night of the gala, Grace stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her dress. Not the handmade cotton one that was carefully preserved in her closet, a precious memory, but a new one, simple, elegant, expensive. She looked like she belonged in Marcus Sterling's world now, but when she looked closer, she still saw her mother's eyes. "You look beautiful," Marcus said from her doorway. Grace turned. "Thank you. Are you ready?" "I think so." They arrived at the gala together, and this time, when Grace walked through those massive doors, she wasn't alone. Marcus was beside her, his hand on her back, his presence a shield against judgment. The ballroom looked exactly as Grace remembered. Same chandeliers, same marble floors, same expensive people in expensive clothes. But everything was different, because this time when Victoria Ashford saw Grace, her expression wasn't cruel, it was nervous. When Margaret approached, she was polite, almost deferential. When other guests stared, it wasn't with contempt, but with curiosity, and in some cases respect. Grace was no longer invisible. "Ms. Carter," a voice said, and Grace turned to see Sophie, the kind young woman who'd complimented her dress months ago. "It's good to see you again." "You too," Grace said warmly. "I just wanted to say I think what you're doing with the Education Foundation is wonderful," Sophie said. "My younger sister qualified for one of your scholarships. It's going to change her life." Grace's throat tightened. "That's exactly what we hoped for." Sophie smiled and moved on, and Grace felt something warm bloom in her chest. This was why she was here, not for the money or the status or the recognition, but to help people the way her mother had always helped people. "May I have this dance?" Grace turned to find Marcus offering his hand just as he had months ago, but this time there was no shock, no scandal, no whispers of confusion. This time, everyone knew exactly who she was. Grace took his hand, and Marcus led her onto the dance floor. The music swelled, and they began to waltz just as they had before. "Thank you," Grace said quietly. "For what?" "For everything. For finding me. For claiming me. For loving me." Marcus's eyes glistened. "Grace, you're my daughter. Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done." They danced in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Marcus said, "I have something for you." "What?" "Not here. After the gala. Can't you just tell me now?" "No." Marcus smiled. "You'll have to wait." Grace groaned, but she was smiling too. The rest of the evening passed pleasantly. Grace mingled, made connections, and slowly began to understand her place in this world. She would never fully belong. She was too much her mother's daughter for that, but she could exist here. She could make a difference here. Finally, around midnight, Marcus suggested they leave. They drove back to the estate in comfortable silence, and Marcus led Grace to his study. He pulled out a folder from his desk and handed it to her. "What is this?" Grace asked. "Open it." Grace opened the folder and found legal documents, lots of them. She scanned the first page, trying to understand, and then she saw it. The Grace and Lorraine Carter Foundation for Educational Excellence. "You're establishing a foundation," Grace whispered. "We're establishing a foundation," Marcus corrected. "In your name and your mother's name. Fully funded, fully operational, focused entirely on helping students from low-income backgrounds access education." He paused. "You'll run it if you want, or we can hire someone, and you can oversee it. Whatever you prefer." Grace couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Your mother deserved to be remembered," Marcus said quietly. "She deserved to have her name on something that matters, and you deserve to have the resources to change lives the way she changed ours." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "This is too much. It's not enough." Marcus pulled her into a hug. "It will never be enough to make up for the years I missed, but it's a start. Grace clung to him, this man who was her father, who loved her mother, who was trying so hard to do right by both of them. She would have loved this, Grace whispered. I know. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other, honoring the woman who'd brought them together. 6 months after the press conference, the Grace and Lorraine Carter Foundation held its first scholarship ceremony. 50 students received full scholarships to universities across the country. 50 students who'd been working multiple jobs, struggling to survive, dreaming of something better. 50 students who reminded Grace of herself. She stood on the stage, looking out at the audience, and saw her mother in every face, saw the hope, the determination, the desperate desire for a better life. My mother used to tell me that education was the key to freedom, Grace said into the microphone. She said that no one could take knowledge away from you once you had it, that it was yours forever. Her voice shook. She never got to finish her own education. She spent her life working so I could have opportunities she never had, and she did it without complaint, without regret, with nothing but love. Grace looked at Marcus, who stood in the front row, his eyes wet. This foundation exists because of her, Grace continued, because she taught me that we have a responsibility to help each other, that those of us who have resources have an obligation to share them, that wealth means nothing if it doesn't create opportunity for others. She looked back at the scholarship recipients. So, to all of you receiving scholarships today, I want you to know something. You earned this, you worked for this, you deserve this. And when you succeed, and you will succeed, I hope you'll remember where you came from. I hope you'll reach back and help someone else climb up. That's how we change the world. One person at a time, one opportunity at a time. The audience erupted in applause. After the ceremony, Grace mingled with the students, hearing their stories, sharing her own. One young woman, maybe 19, approached her nervously. Ms. Carter, I just wanted to say thank you. This scholarship is literally changing my life. I was about to drop out because I couldn't afford tuition, and now I can finish my degree. Grace took the young woman's hands. What's your name? Maria. Maria, you're going to do amazing things, I know it. Maria's eyes filled with tears. How do you know? Because you didn't give up, Grace said simply. You kept fighting even when it was hard. That's how I know. After Maria walked away, Marcus appeared at Grace's side. You're a natural at this. I'm just doing what my mother would have done. You're doing what you were meant to do, Marcus corrected, and I couldn't be more proud. Grace leaned against him, and Marcus wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they watched the scholarship recipients celebrate their futures. Do you think she can see this? Grace asked quietly. I know she can, Marcus said, and I know she's proud of you too. Grace closed her eyes and let herself believe it. Let herself feel her mother's presence in the room, in the laughter of students, in the hope that filled the air. I love you, Dad, Grace whispered. Marcus's arm tightened around her. I love you too, sweetheart. And in that moment, surrounded by hope and possibility and the legacy of a woman who'd sacrificed everything for love, Grace Carter finally felt complete. She'd found her father, she'd found her purpose, she'd found herself, and she knew with absolute certainty that her mother was smiling. End.